The first time he noticed it, he thought it was a mistake. A simple accounting error. Something his finance department would fix before the end of the day. But by midnight, the numbers still didn't make sense. And that was a problem, because Kang Min-jae never ignored numbers. A billionaire. A powerful CEO. A man whose name alone made competitors nervous. People called him cold. Some called him ruthless. Others whispered that he had ties to organizations nobody dared investigate. Whatever the truth was, one thing remained certain. Nothing happened around him without his knowledge. Nothing. Yet somehow millions of dollars had disappeared from his private accounts. Not once. Not twice. But repeatedly. Every month. Every transaction was hidden beneath layers of legitimate transfers. Carefully disguised. Almost impossible to detect. Almost. Min-jae stared at the report on his desk. The city lights of Seoul reflected through the glass walls of his penthouse office. His jaw tightened. His dark eyes narrowed. Someone was stealing from him. And whoever it was clearly understood how to avoid suspicion. Most people would have panicked. Min-jae became calm. Dangerously calm. Because he knew something everyone else didn't. The smartest thieves were often the people closest to you. 3 days later, the investigation delivered its first result. His trusted financial director entered the office looking nervous. The man's hands trembled slightly as he placed a file on the desk. Min-jae looked up. Who is it? The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, the director swallowed hard. Sir, every trail leads to Madam. The room became silent. Even the air felt frozen. For several seconds Min-jae didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Then he slowly opened the file. Inside were transfer records. Authorization signatures. Access logs. Everything pointed to one person. His wife. The woman he trusted more than anyone. The woman who slept beside him every night. The woman he had promised to protect for the rest of his life. Nia. A soft smile once lived permanently on her face. A gentle African woman whose kindness seemed untouched by the cruelty of the world. The last person anyone would suspect of stealing. Yet the evidence said otherwise. And evidence never lied. At least that was what Min-jae believed. But what he didn't know was that the truth would soon destroy everything he thought he understood about love. And when that truth finally revealed itself, it would bring him to his knees. If you love Korean billionaire romance and mafia love stories like this, subscribe now to @Official_Threads and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Min-jae wasn't born rich. Most people assumed he came from privilege. That wealth had always surrounded him. That success had been handed to him. The reality was completely different. He grew up in a place nobody remembered. An abandoned neighborhood on the outskirts of Seoul. A forgotten area where broken buildings stood like monuments to lost dreams. His mother worked herself to exhaustion trying to feed him. His father disappeared before he could even remember his face. There were days when food didn't exist. Days when hunger became normal. Days when survival itself felt like a miracle. At 12 years old, Min-jae learned something important. The world only respected power. Not kindness. Not honesty. Power. That lesson shaped everything that came afterward. By 28, he had built an empire. Hotels. Construction companies. Technology investments. Luxury real estate. His influence spread across Asia. His enemies feared him. His employees respected him. Yet despite all his success, loneliness followed him everywhere. Money filled his accounts. But not his heart. The mansion he lived in was proof of that. The enormous estate sat on a hill overlooking Seoul. Marble floors. Massive chandeliers. Private gardens. Everything money could buy. Yet somehow it always felt empty. Cold. Silent. Until Nia arrived. Their meeting had been completely unexpected. 3 years earlier, Min-jae attended a charity gala hosted by international organizations. Normally he hated such events. Too many cameras. Too many fake smiles. Too many wealthy people pretending to care. He planned to leave after 30 minutes. Then he saw her. She wasn't wearing the most expensive dress. She wasn't surrounded by important people. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Instead, she stood beside a table helping organize donations for underprivileged children. Smiling. Laughing. Making everyone around her feel comfortable. Something about her felt different. Real. For the first time in years, Min-jae found himself unable to look away. Meanwhile, Nia had no idea who he was. She had recently moved to South Korea after receiving a scholarship connected to international humanitarian programs. She spent most of her time volunteering, helping children, supporting communities, trying to make a difference wherever she could. Money never motivated her. Status didn't impress her. When Min Jae approached her that night, she treated him exactly the same way she treated everyone else. And strangely enough, he loved that. For months he pursued her. Patiently, carefully, something he had never done before. At first she resisted, not because she disliked him, but because she sensed pain behind his cold exterior. A darkness he refused to discuss. A loneliness he kept hidden. Yet little by little, walls began falling. Conversations became longer. Smiles became more frequent. Friendship slowly transformed into something deeper. Something impossible to ignore. Then one rainy evening, everything changed. They were standing beneath a small shelter overlooking the Han River. The city lights shimmered across the water. Nia looked at him and asked a simple question. What scares you most? Min Jae laughed softly. Nobody had ever asked him that before. People usually asked about money, power, success, never fear. For a long moment, he remained silent. Then he answered honestly. Being abandoned. The word surprised even him. Nia looked at him carefully. Not judging, not questioning, simply listening. And somehow that made the confession even more powerful. That night marked the beginning of their love story. 1 year later they married. The wedding shocked everyone. Business leaders couldn't understand why one of Korea's most powerful men would choose a woman with no wealth, no influence, no powerful family. But Min Jae didn't care. Because for the first time in his life, he felt understood, loved, accepted, or at least he thought he was. Now 3 years later, he sat alone in his office staring at evidence suggesting his wife had betrayed him. The irony was cruel, painfully cruel. Outside the office window, rain struck the glass. Inside, doubts grew stronger. Had he been wrong about her all along? Had everything been an act? A carefully constructed performance designed to gain access to his fortune? The thought made his chest tighten. But what happens next changes everything. Because while Min Jae struggled with suspicion, Nia remained completely unaware. At that exact moment, she was sitting inside a small cafe across town, reviewing documents, making phone calls, smiling warmly at the elderly owner who served her tea. She looked peaceful, happy, nothing like someone hiding a crime. Yet appearances could be deceptive. At least that's what Min Jae kept telling himself. The following week, he quietly expanded the investigation. No confrontation, no accusations, no warnings. He wanted certainty, and certainty arrived faster than expected. Every missing dollar connected to accounts authorized under Nia's name. Every transfer, every payment, every withdrawal. The pattern was undeniable. His security chief delivered the final report late Friday evening. Sir, would you like us to stop the transfers immediately? Min Jae stared at the city lights. No. The security chief looked surprised. No, sir. Min Jae slowly turned toward him. I want to know where the money is going. That decision would soon backfire. Because the closer he came to the truth, the more his heart began to break. Days passed. Then weeks. The investigation continued. Meanwhile, life inside the mansion changed. Min Jae became distant, colder than usual. Conversations shortened. Smiles disappeared. Dinner became silent. Nia noticed immediately. She always noticed. One evening she placed chopsticks down and looked across the table. Is something wrong? Min Jae didn't meet her eyes. No. You seem upset. I'm busy. The answer sounded sharp, even harsher than intended. Nia fell silent. A small shadow crossed her face. For a brief moment, guilt touched Min Jae. Then suspicion returned. He reminded himself of the evidence. The missing money. The secret accounts. The unexplained transactions. How could he ignore that? How could he pretend nothing was happening? What he didn't know was that Nia carried secrets too. Not dangerous secrets. Not selfish secrets. But secrets she hoped would remain hidden until the perfect moment. And every day, she grew closer to revealing them. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. One afternoon, Min Jae returned home unexpectedly. As he entered the mansion, he heard voices coming from the library. Nia was inside speaking on the phone. He stopped near the doorway, not intentionally listening, just curious. Then he heard her words. The children are excited. His eyes narrowed. Children? We still need funding for the final phase. Funding. The word immediately caught his attention. His heartbeat quickened. Nia continued speaking. I promised everything would be ready soon. Then she lowered her voice. The remaining conversation became impossible to hear. Minutes later, she emerged from the library. smiling, holding documents against her chest. The moment she saw Min Jae, her smile brightened. Yet strangely enough, that smile only increased his doubts. What exactly was she hiding? That night, he barely slept. Questions consumed him. Images replayed endlessly inside his mind. Missing money, secret conversations, hidden projects. Every clue seemed connected. But connected to what? The answer remained frustratingly out of reach. Meanwhile, danger wasn't approaching from criminals or rivals. It was approaching from misunderstanding. And misunderstandings often cause deeper wounds than enemies ever could. The next morning, Min Jae made a decision. He would follow her, not as a husband, as an investigator. He hated himself for it. Yet he couldn't stop. The need for answers had become overwhelming. 3 days later, the opportunity arrived. Nia left the mansion shortly after lunch. Instead of heading toward her usual volunteer center, she drove across the city. Then beyond the city, toward the outskirts. Min Jae followed from a distance. The further she traveled, the more confused he became. The neighborhoods grew older, poorer, less developed. Nothing about the route suggested luxury. Nothing suggested personal gain. Still, he continued following. Eventually, her vehicle turned onto a quiet road lined with trees. At the end stood a large property surrounded by fresh landscaping. New buildings, playgrounds, gardens. The place looked beautiful, alive, hopeful. Children laughed somewhere beyond the gates. Min Jae parked several hundred meters away. His heart pounded. What was this place? Why had millions been transferred here? And most importantly, why hadn't she told him? As Nia stepped from her car, something extraordinary happened. A group of children suddenly ran toward her, laughing, smiling, calling out joyfully, "Mom! Mom Nia! We missed you!" The children surrounded her immediately, hugging her, holding her hands, fighting for her attention. And Nia laughed. The purest laugh Min Jae had heard in weeks, maybe months. His confusion deepened. Nothing about the scene matched his expectations. Nothing. And standing there hidden among the trees, for the first time since the investigation began, Min Jae wondered if he had misunderstood everything. But the truth remained hidden. For now. And what he would discover next would challenge everything he believed about trust, love, and the woman he married. Min Jae remained inside his vehicle long after the children surrounded Nia. He could have stepped out. He could have confronted her. He could have demanded answers. Instead, he stayed hidden, watching, listening, trying to understand what his eyes were seeing. The children clung to her as if she were family. Not a visitor. Not a donor. Family. One little girl with braided hair wrapped both arms around Nia's waist and refused to let go. Another boy proudly showed her a drawing. A younger child held up a flower he had picked from the garden. Nia accepted every gift as though it were priceless. The smile on her face wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It was genuine. The kind of smile that came from the deepest part of someone's heart. Min Jae felt strangely uncomfortable. Because this wasn't the image of a thief. This wasn't the image of someone secretly stealing millions for selfish reasons. Yet facts were facts. Money had disappeared. And somehow this place was connected to it. The question was how. Meanwhile, Nia walked toward the main building with several children holding her hands. A middle-aged woman emerged from the entrance. The woman greeted her warmly before embracing her. They spoke briefly before entering together. Min Jae watched every movement. His instincts told him to stay. His pride told him to leave. For almost an hour he remained parked beneath the shade of tall trees. Then finally he stepped out. The afternoon breeze carried laughter across the property. Children played soccer near a newly built field. Others sat beneath colorful umbrellas reading books. A few were planting flowers. The atmosphere felt peaceful, safe. Nothing about it resembled the dark suspicions that had consumed him for weeks. Still, he needed answers. As he approached the gates, a security worker stopped him politely. "Can I help you, sir?" Min Jae glanced toward the main building. "What is this place?" The man smiled. "An orphanage." The answer was simple, but somehow it struck harder than expected. An orphanage. Min Jae stared at the children running through the garden. For a moment, memories he spent years burying threatened to surface. Memories of loneliness, of hunger, of sleeping in abandoned buildings, of wondering if anyone cared whether he survived another day. The feelings vanished almost immediately. He had trained himself long ago to suppress them. Yet something about this place disturbed those defenses. "What is the name of the orphanage?" he asked quietly. The worker pointed toward a large stone monument near the entrance. Min Jae turned and froze. His heartbeat stopped. The world around him disappeared. All he could see were the words engraved into the stone. Kong Min Jae Children's Foundation. For several seconds he couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. His own name stared back at him. His name, not Nia's, not another donor's. His. Confusion crashed into him like a wave. He had never funded this project, never approved it, never heard about it. Yet somehow an entire orphanage existed bearing his name. Why? The question echoed endlessly inside his mind. Why? The security worker noticed his reaction. Proud moment, isn't it? Min Jae looked at him. What do you mean? The man smiled. Everyone here knows the story. What story? The founder wanted the children to remember that even the most successful people can come from difficult beginnings. A strange feeling settled inside Min Jae's chest. The worker continued. She told us Mr. Kong grew up with almost nothing. She said his story proves that your past doesn't determine your future. Min Jae's throat tightened. Only a handful of people knew details about his childhood. One of them was Nia. Suddenly he understood. She had told them. Not to embarrass him. Not to expose him. To inspire them. The realization left him speechless. But what he didn't know was that the truth went even deeper. Far deeper. Inside the building, Nia sat among several children helping them with homework. A young boy struggled with mathematics. Patiently, she guided him through every problem. A little girl sat beside her drawing pictures. Another child leaned comfortably against her shoulder. The room felt alive. Warm. Filled with love. Something Min Jae rarely experienced growing up. He stood outside a nearby window unnoticed. Watching. Listening. Observing. And the longer he watched, the more uncomfortable he became. Not because of what Nia was doing. Because of what he had been thinking. For weeks he had convinced himself she was betraying him. For weeks he had questioned her character. For weeks he had doubted the woman who never once gave him a reason to doubt her. The guilt began quietly, then grew. Yet he still didn't know everything. And uncertainty continued poisoning his thoughts. Later that afternoon, Nia met privately with the middle-aged woman from earlier. They entered an office near the back of the building. The door remained partially open. Min Jae found himself close enough to hear fragments of their conversation. The final building should be finished before winter. The children need more rooms. We're almost within budget. Budget. Again that word appeared. Then came another sentence. One that changed everything. We couldn't have done this without your sacrifice. The older woman looked emotional. Nia smiled softly. It was worth every cent. Every cent. The words echoed painfully. Because suddenly Min Jae realized something. She wasn't taking money. She was spending it. On this place. On these children. But why keep it secret? Why hide something so beautiful? That question haunted him throughout the drive home. Meanwhile, Nia remained completely unaware she had been followed. Completely unaware her husband had finally discovered part of the truth. That evening she returned to the mansion carrying the same warmth she always carried home. Yet the atmosphere felt different. Min Jae couldn't stop looking at her. Couldn't stop wondering. Couldn't stop questioning himself. During dinner, she noticed his unusual behavior. You've been staring at me all evening. He blinked. Caught. For a moment he considered telling her everything. The investigation. The suspicion. The orphanage. Instead he remained silent. And that silence would soon become one of his greatest regrets. Because what happens next changes everything. The following morning Min Jae returned to the orphanage alone. This time openly. No hiding. No surveillance. No suspicion. The staff welcomed him politely. Most didn't recognize him immediately. Others did. The children certainly didn't. To them he was simply another visitor. One little boy approached him curiously. Are you lost? Min Jae almost laughed. Nobody had ever asked him that. Not in years. Perhaps not ever. The boy continued staring. You look sad. The comment caught him completely off guard. Sad. He was one of the most powerful men in Korea. Feared. Respected. Successful. Yet somehow a child saw sadness before anything else. Min Jae crouched slightly. Do I? The boy nodded confidently. My mom says people who don't smile are usually carrying heavy things inside. Mom. The child wasn't talking about a biological parent. He was talking about Nia. And somehow that realization touched something deep within him. As the day continued, he explored the property. Every corner revealed another surprise. A library. A music room. A medical center. Playgrounds. Classrooms. Gardens. Everything designed with care. Everything created to give children opportunities. Opportunities he never had. Then he found a wall. A simple wall covered with framed photographs. Pictures documenting the orphanage's construction. The earliest images showed empty land. Then foundations. Then buildings. Then smiling children. At the center of the display stood a photograph of Nia, covered in dirt, holding blueprints, laughing beside construction workers. She looked exhausted, yet happy. Beneath the picture was a small plaque. The words nearly broke him. Built through love, sacrifice, and hope for every child who feels forgotten. Min Jae stared at those words for a very long time. Forgotten. That single word carried painful memories. Because once upon a time, he had been one of those children. The realization struck harder than anything before. Nia hadn't built this orphanage because she loved charity. She built it because she loved him. She remembered stories he barely remembered telling. Tiny details from late-night conversations. Fragments of pain he thought she had forgotten. Yet she remembered all of it. Every piece. Every scar. Every wound. And somehow she transformed those memories into hope for hundreds of children. The truth was beautiful. But another truth remained. She still hadn't told him. Why? That question continued growing. The answer arrived sooner than expected. 3 days later, Min Jae accidentally discovered an old notebook inside Nia's study. Normally, he respected her privacy. Normally, he would never look. But the notebook sat open on the desk, and one page immediately caught his attention. His name, written repeatedly. Curiosity overcame hesitation. Slowly, he began reading. What he found shattered him. The entries stretched back nearly 2 years. Each page documented plans for the orphanage, fundraising ideas, construction updates, personal thoughts, dreams. One passage made his hands tremble. Min Jae still believes his childhood made him weak. He doesn't realize surviving those years made him stronger than anyone I've ever met. Another entry read, he never speaks about being hungry as a child, but I can see the pain in his eyes whenever he sees abandoned children. One day I want him to see how many lives his story can change. Then came the final entry. The entry that broke every remaining wall around his heart. I want to surprise him when everything is complete. Not because he needs recognition, but because he deserves to know his life means something beyond money and power. He deserves to know that children who feel invisible now have hope because of him. Min Jae closed the notebook. His vision blurred. For years he believed success was measured by numbers. Profit. Influence. Power. Yet the woman he loved measured success differently. In healing. In kindness. In second chances. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt ashamed. Ashamed that he doubted her. Ashamed that he investigated her. Ashamed that he believed the worst. Meanwhile, Nia was already planning something even bigger. Something she hoped would finally reveal the entire truth. And when that day arrived, neither of them would ever be the same again. For the first time in many years, Kang Min Jae couldn't concentrate on work. Important meetings continued. Contracts worth millions waited for approval. Executives filled conference rooms expecting instructions. But his mind remained somewhere else. At the orphanage. With the children. With Nia. And with the terrible truth he had finally realized. The woman he loved had never betrayed him. She had spent years building something beautiful. Something meaningful. Something inspired by the deepest wounds he carried inside himself. And while she had been creating hope for abandoned children, he had been investigating her like a criminal. The guilt became unbearable. Every memory now looked different. Every conversation. Every smile. Every moment she tried to include him in her world. He remembered all the times she asked him to visit charity events. All the times she encouraged him to spend time with children. All the times she gently tried helping him reconnect with parts of himself he preferred to ignore. And each time he had dismissed her. Too busy. Too important. Too occupied building an empire. Now he finally understood. She wasn't trying to change him. She was trying to heal him. Meanwhile, Nia remained completely unaware of everything happening inside her husband's heart. For weeks, she had noticed his growing distance. His coldness. His silence. And despite her efforts to stay positive, the changes hurt. More than she admitted. One evening she stood alone on the balcony outside their bedroom. The city lights sparkled beneath the dark sky. The view was breathtaking. Yet she felt lonely. The balcony door opened behind her. Min Jae stepped outside. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt heavy. Different from before. Not cold. Just uncertain. Nia finally broke it. Have I done something wrong? The question pierced straight through him. For a moment he couldn't answer. Because the truth was devastating. No, she hadn't done anything wrong. He had. But the words remained trapped inside his chest. Nia lowered her eyes. I know something has changed. Her voice sounded soft. Fragile. You don't talk to me the way you used to. The guilt intensified. Still he remained silent. A mistake he would regret. Because what she said next nearly broke him. If you're unhappy with me, please tell me. Min Jae immediately looked at her. The sadness in her eyes was impossible to ignore. She had spent weeks blaming herself. Weeks wondering whether she had somehow damaged their marriage. And all because he couldn't find the courage to admit his mistake. Before he could respond, she smiled weakly. It's okay. But it clearly wasn't. Then she quietly returned inside, leaving him alone beneath the night sky. And for the first time since becoming one of Korea's most feared men, Min Jae felt powerless. The next few days became increasingly difficult. Every time he looked at her, guilt stared back. Every act of kindness reminded him of his suspicions. Every smile reminded him he didn't deserve it. Meanwhile, Nia focused on preparations for something important. The orphanage was nearly complete. The final phase of the project would be finished within weeks. She wanted everything perfect. Not for herself. For him. Because she still planned to surprise Min Jae. She imagined his reaction constantly. The smile on his face. The shock. The happiness. What she didn't know was that he had already discovered everything. Or at least most of it. The final piece remained hidden. And that final piece would soon change both their lives forever. One afternoon, while reviewing additional documents related to the orphanage, Min Jae found an envelope he had never seen before. His name appeared on the front. The handwriting belonged to Nia. Curiosity quickly replaced hesitation. Slowly he opened it. Inside was a letter. A letter she had written months earlier. Apparently intended for the day she finally revealed the orphanage. As he began reading, his chest tightened. My love, you often tell people that success comes from strength. But I think your greatest strength has always been your kindness. You just don't see it. The little boy who survived loneliness never disappeared. He's still inside you. I see him every time you secretly help employees whose families are struggling. I see him when you anonymously pay hospital bills. I see him whenever you pretend not to care, but stay awake worrying about people you love. You built an empire. But before that, you survived something much harder. You survived being forgotten. That's why this orphanage exists. Because somewhere right now another child feels exactly the way you once felt. And maybe one day they'll walk through these doors and realize they aren't alone. Min Jae stopped reading. His vision blurred. Tears threatened to form. Something that almost never happened. The letter continued. One day I hope you'll forgive yourself for everything life put you through. And when that day comes, I hope you'll see yourself the way I see you. For several moments he simply sat there. Silent. Motionless. Overwhelmed. No business achievement had ever affected him like this. No award. No recognition. Nothing. Because those things celebrated what he accomplished. Nia celebrated who he was. And that meant infinitely more. But what happens next changes everything. The following week, the orphanage scheduled its official opening ceremony. Children from nearby communities would attend. Local leaders would visit. Volunteers planned celebrations. Nia personally organized every detail. Yet one thing remained unfinished. The guest of honor. Min Jae. She intended to invite him personally. The surprise was finally ready. The night before the ceremony, she returned home carrying documents and photographs. Her excitement was impossible to hide. Min Jae noticed immediately. You seem happy. Nia smiled. I am. Something special happening? Her eyes sparkled. Maybe. For the first time in weeks, genuine warmth passed between them. A small moment, yet powerful. Then she handed him an envelope. I wanted to give you this tomorrow. His heartbeat accelerated. The invitation. Finally, Nia sat beside him. Nervous. Excited. Hopeful. Slowly he opened it. Inside was a beautifully designed invitation card. The words nearly made him emotional. Guest of honor. Kang Min Jae. Founder, inspiration, and lifetime benefactor. His throat tightened. Nia watched carefully. Waiting. Hoping. Then she began speaking. For the next hour she explained everything. The land. The construction. The children. The dream she carried for nearly 2 years. She talked about every challenge. Every setback. Every victory. And throughout the entire conversation, one thing became painfully clear. She never expected recognition, never wanted praise. Her greatest hope was simply seeing him smile. Finally, she finished. Silence followed. Nia's expression became uncertain. Are you upset? The question shattered whatever remained of Min Jae's defenses. Without warning, he stood, then walked around the table. Nia looked confused. Before she could react, he pulled her into his arms. Tightly, desperately, as though he never wanted to let go. At first she froze, then slowly wrapped her arms around him. Neither spoke. Words weren't enough. Not for this moment. Not for everything he felt. After several seconds, she whispered softly. Min Jae. His voice sounded rough. I don't deserve you. Nia immediately pulled back. Confused. What are you talking about? For a long moment, he struggled to answer. Then finally the truth emerged. Every painful piece. The missing money. The investigation. The suspicions. Following her. Discovering the orphanage. Reading the journal. Reading the letter. Everything. Nothing remained hidden. As the confession continued, Nia's expression changed repeatedly. Shock. Disbelief. Hurt. Understanding. Then silence. Terrible silence. When he finally finished speaking, neither moved. Neither knew what to say. Min Jae prepared himself for anger. Prepared himself for disappointment. Prepared himself for tears. Instead, Nia surprised him again, just as she always did. She reached forward and touched his face gently. You were scared. He stared at her. What? You thought someone you loved betrayed you. Her voice remained calm. Compassionate. Even now. You weren't angry. She smiled sadly. You were afraid. Those words struck deeper than any accusation could have. Because she was right. At the center of everything wasn't greed. Or suspicion. Or pride. It was fear. The same fear he confessed years ago beside the Han River. Fear of abandonment. Fear of losing someone important. Fear of being left behind again. Nia understood immediately. Because she understood him better than anyone. Then something happened that neither would ever forget. Min Jae cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The way broken hearts sometimes do when they've carried too much for too long. And Nia held him. The same way she had always held him. Without judgment. Without conditions. Without hesitation. That night became a turning point in their marriage. The walls surrounding his heart finally cracked. Years of pain began finding light. Years of loneliness began finding healing. Yet the biggest moment still awaited them. Because tomorrow would bring the official opening ceremony. And with it, a revelation even Nia never expected. One that would leave an entire crowd in tears. And change the future of the orphanage forever. The morning of the opening ceremony arrived beneath clear blue skies. Sunlight poured across the orphanage grounds. Fresh flowers lined the walkways. Colorful decorations hung from trees. Children ran through the gardens laughing with excitement. Volunteers made final preparations. Staff members rushed between buildings. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't just another event. This was the beginning of something special. Something that would change lives. Inside the mansion, however, the morning felt very different. For the first time in years, Kang Min Jae stood in front of a mirror feeling nervous. Not before a business merger. Not before a board meeting. Not before signing billion-dollar contracts. But before standing in front of children. Before facing a part of himself he had spent years avoiding. The little boy who once felt forgotten. The little boy who once wondered if anyone cared. That child still existed somewhere inside him. And today he would finally stop pretending otherwise. Behind him, Nia adjusted the collar of his suit. Her movements were gentle, familiar, comforting. When she finished, she smiled. You look handsome. Min Jae looked at her reflection in the mirror. His expression softened immediately. That had become more common lately. The cold distance that once separated them had disappeared. In its place was something warmer. Something stronger. Trust. The very thing he nearly destroyed. And now he intended to protect it for the rest of his life. You should have told me sooner, he said quietly. Nia laughed softly. Then it wouldn't have been a surprise. He shook his head. You planned all this by yourself. Not by myself. She smiled. The children helped. That answer somehow made him smile too. And Nia noticed. Because now she noticed something different every day. He smiled more. Laughed more. Opened up more. The man who once locked away every emotion was finally learning how to let people in. But what neither of them knew was that the day still held one final surprise. A surprise waiting quietly among hundreds of guests. One that would reach directly into Min Jae's past. An hour later they arrived at the orphanage. The moment their vehicle entered the property, applause erupted. Children ran toward them. Volunteers waved. Staff members welcomed them enthusiastically. Nia stepped out first. Immediately, several children surrounded her, just as they always did. Min Jae watched with affection. This time there was no confusion, no suspicion, only admiration. Because now he understood what she had built. Not just buildings, not just classrooms. A family. A place where abandoned children could feel wanted. A place where hope could grow. And standing there watching her laugh with the children, he felt something unexpected. Pride. Not in himself. In her. The ceremony began shortly afterward. Guests filled rows of seats facing a beautifully decorated stage. Community leaders attended. Business partners arrived. Volunteers gathered. Children sat excitedly in the front rows. Many wore clothes purchased specifically for the occasion. Their smiles alone made every sacrifice worthwhile. The master of ceremonies welcomed everyone. Several speakers shared remarks. Stories were told. Achievements were celebrated. Then came the moment everyone anticipated. The introduction of the man whose name stood above the orphanage entrance. Kang Min-jae. As he approached the stage, applause filled the grounds. Yet something felt strange. For perhaps the first time in his life, he didn't want recognition. He didn't want praise. Because the truth was simple. The real hero sat among the audience. Nia. The woman who transformed his pain into hope. The woman who taught him that success meant more than money. The woman who changed his life. Min Jae reached the podium. Silence settled over the crowd. Hundreds of eyes watched him. Waiting. Expecting. For a moment he simply stood there. Looking at the children. Looking at the staff. Looking at the buildings. Then his eyes found Nia. And everything became clear. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the entire property. I spent most of my life believing strength meant never showing weakness. The audience listened carefully. I believed success meant having power. He paused. I believed money could solve almost anything. The crowd remained silent. But I was wrong. The words surprised many people. Because powerful men rarely admitted being wrong. Min Jae continued. When I was a child, I knew what it felt like to be forgotten. The atmosphere changed immediately. People leaned forward, listening. I knew what hunger felt like. He swallowed carefully. I knew what loneliness felt like. Several children stared at him, completely focused. For the first time, they weren't looking at a billionaire. They were looking at someone who understood them. Someone who had lived through similar pain. Min Jae glanced toward Nia. Emotion filled his eyes. And yet someone came into my life and taught me something important. His voice softened. Being loved changes everything. The audience followed his gaze. Toward Nia. Many immediately understood. Min Jae smiled. A real smile. The kind rarely seen in public. My wife built this place. Gasps spread throughout the crowd. Even some staff members looked surprised. Because very few people knew the full story. She built it because she remembered things I tried to forget. His voice became emotional. She saw value in parts of me I considered broken. Nia lowered her eyes. Clearly overwhelmed. But Min Jae wasn't finished. Not even close. Because today wasn't just about honoring the orphanage. It was about honoring her. The woman who made it possible. And what happens next changes everything. Min Jae reached into his jacket pocket, then removed several documents. The audience looked confused. So did Nia. Slowly he placed the papers on the podium, then looked directly at her. Last night I made a decision. The crowd remained silent. Waiting. I realized this orphanage shouldn't help hundreds of children. He paused. It should help thousands. A murmur spread through the audience. Nia looked stunned. Min Jae continued. This morning I signed documents establishing a permanent foundation. The crowd erupted into applause. But he raised his hand gently. There was more. Much more. The foundation will build orphanages across Asia. The applause grew louder. Children cheered. Volunteers wiped tears from their eyes. Yet Min Jae still wasn't finished. His next words would become the moment everyone remembered forever. The foundation will not carry my name. The crowd fell silent again. Curious. Confused. Then he smiled toward Nia. It will carry hers. For several seconds nobody reacted. The words needed time to settle. Then reality struck. The audience exploded into applause. Louder than before. Stronger than before. Some people stood. Others cried. The children cheered wildly. And Nia simply covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. She hadn't expected recognition. She certainly hadn't expected this. Min Jae stepped away from the podium, walked down from the stage, and approached her. The applause continued, yet neither seemed aware of it. Their world had narrowed to a single moment, a single conversation, a single truth. When he finally reached her, he spoke softly enough that only she could hear. You gave me back something I lost. Nia's tears continued falling. What? He smiled. Hope. For a moment neither moved. Then she threw her arms around him. The crowd applauded even harder. Children laughed. Volunteers cried openly. And somehow the entire event felt less like a ceremony and more like a celebration of love. Not romantic love alone. Human love. The kind that heals. The kind that transforms lives. The kind that changes futures. Hours later, after most guests departed, Min Jae wandered through the orphanage grounds alone. The sun slowly descended toward the horizon. Golden light covered the gardens. Children continued playing nearby. A few sat beneath trees reading books. Others laughed on swings. The peaceful scene filled him with emotions he couldn't fully explain. Then he noticed a small boy sitting alone on a bench. The child looked familiar. It was the same boy who once told him he looked sad. Min Jae sat beside him. The boy smiled immediately. You're smiling now. Min Jae laughed. I guess I am. The child nodded proudly. I knew you would. For a moment, they watched the sunset together. Then the boy asked something unexpected. Are you happy? The question seemed simple, yet it carried extraordinary weight. Because years earlier nobody could have answered that question for him. Success? Yes. Power? Yes. Happy? No. But now? Now everything felt different. He looked toward the main building where Nia stood helping several children. Warm sunlight illuminated her face. And suddenly the answer became easy. Yes. The boy smiled. I can tell. As evening settled across the property, Min Jae walked toward Nia. She looked tired. Exhausted, actually. But happy. Very happy. The kind of happiness that comes after seeing a dream become reality. Without saying anything, he took her hand. Together they walked through the gardens. Past the classrooms. Past the playgrounds. Past the children whose lives would never be the same. Eventually they stopped in front of the stone monument near the entrance. The monument that once confused him. The monument that carried his name. For several moments they simply stared at it. Then Min Jae looked at her. You know what? What? I think we should leave this one exactly as it is. Nia smiled. Even though the new foundation has a different name? He nodded. Because this place reminds me of where everything changed. The truth was obvious. The orphanage wasn't about his name. Or her name. It was about what they built together. Trust. Healing. Family. A future. The future they would continue building for years to come. And as the final rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, Min Jae realized something he had spent decades searching for. Not in boardrooms. Not in wealth. Not in power. But here, standing beside the woman he loved. Surrounded by children whose lives had been touched by kindness. Home. He had finally found home. This story reminds us that love is not proven through words alone. It is proven through sacrifice, through patience, through understanding someone's pain even when they refuse to talk about it. Min Jae believed trust had been broken because he focused only on evidence and numbers. But true understanding required looking deeper. Nia saw beyond his wealth, status, and reputation. She saw the wounded child inside him and chose to heal rather than judge. The story teaches that real love helps people become the best version of themselves. It also reminds us that kindness creates ripples far beyond what we can see. One act of compassion can transform hundreds of lives. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is helping them believe they are worthy of love, healing, and hope. If you made it this far, let us know where you're watching from and comment your favorite moment below, like this video, and subscribe to _Threads for more emotional Mafia love stories.